we will get rolling here. So welcome to the webinar. It's Wednesday. We are really excited to have, again, so many folks here joining us for our webinar on how to create and execute imaging protocols for clinical trials. We're super excited. I'm Tim Colbago, playing the role of moderator this time. For those of you who've been on our previous webinars, sometimes I do all the talking. This time you're all very lucky because I will not be doing all the talking, which is pretty darn good. So let's get started with a couple of logistics things. First of all, we've got about a 45-minute presentation for you, so that's good, and we'll just get through as much as we can. If things work out really well, we'll be able to do Q&A and answer some of your questions. The best way we do that in the webinar is we like you to type them in. With so many people on the line, we really can't open up the phone call so people can ask questions live. And we do this kind of ourselves, so we don't have a moderator on a separate line. And if we unmute everybody, somebody's dog will be barking, or somebody's in the car, or something like that. So if you see the question box, you are welcome to type in your questions whenever you want, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. If any of you are having any trouble connecting, our phone number is up there. If you're already connected, you will probably see on the right-hand side of your screen a nice little control panel for you where your question asking button is and all that kind of stuff. There's a little orange arrow. You can slide that to the right to make us full screen if you need to do that. So that would be very cool. And finally, we're using GoToWebinar this time around. We were using another solution for our other webinars, but this time we're using GoToWebinar. And so if you have any questions, give us a call. There's our number. It's 855-ImageIQ, in case anybody wondered. We thought that was pretty cool. So now we've got a few other folks who have gone through the registration process, so we'll get started right now and get into the meat of this. While the last few folks do get online, let me introduce our speakers for today. First of all, we have, with several stitches in his finger, our Dr. Amit Basanji, the founder and chief technology officer here at ImageIQ. And we could spend the whole hour talking about all the stuff Amit has done in his imaging career. But the short version is he's been involved with medical imaging and software development for 12+ years. Prior to being at ImageIQ, he was actually responsible for the Biomedical Imaging and Analysis Center within the Cleveland Clinic, which is really exciting. And during that time, he authored over 50 publications, won several awards, mainly focused around innovation in imaging and customer service and serving the community in the Cleveland Clinic. So, like I said, we could go on, but we have an hour. We've kind of got to stop.
And Amit's blushing now.
Yeah, Amit is blushing now. That's true. Our other presenter is Shanda Coombs-Bland. Shanda has joined the ImageIQ executive team this year as our Chief Operating Officer. So, Shanda, welcome to your first ImageIQ webinar.
Thanks.
That's very cool. Now, prior to joining ImageIQ, I know you were a business executive in a lot of healthcare outpatient scenarios in Owensboro, Kentucky.
I will self-proclaim as a Southern girl for people who want to make fun of the accent. The entire webinar, yeah. We'll just get it out of the way right now.
Get it out of the way at the beginning. Good idea. But one of the reasons Shanda is going to be very valuable here is she served as Chief Operating Officer and ultimately Administrative Director for an outpatient imaging practice in Owensboro called Radiology and Diagnostic Imaging, as well as the Director for Outpatient Diagnostics at Owensboro Health. So, Shanda, welcome to the webinar, and thanks very much. And finally, I'm Tim Colbago, CEO of ImageIQ. I'll be playing moderator for you today. I'll probably do a little John Madden and ask a few questions. I've got 15 years or so of experience in medical imaging software, ranging from very large, for those of you who knew Picker, Marconi, Phillips. I see some Phillips folks are on the line, so hi, former Phillips coworkers. Small startups in a company called RiskLogic to a medium-sized publicly traded company, Merge Healthcare. And while I'm an engineer by education, I've been playing the role of management here for a while. So that's kind of who we are, and it looks like we've got a lot of good folks registered and everybody's in, so let's get rocking and rolling. We always like to start our webinar with the story. That's me, and we like to start our webinar with the story. And one of the things I do as a hobby, or if you ask my wife as a death wish, is that I have been learning to fly very small planes all by myself. And when we were working on the webinar, we were saying to ourselves, how can we help everyone understand the importance of writing a good imaging protocol, not a high-level study protocol, but a good imaging protocol. And we started talking about, it's kind of like when you're flying a plane. When you take flying lessons and you're going through flight training, you spend a lot of time practicing and memorizing and preparing for things that might happen, right? So when something really bad happens, you know what to do. And you really hope nothing bad happens, but when it does, you're ready. And the other thing we spend a lot of time doing is using checklists. So you're going to hear, I know Shana will talk a little bit about the use of checklists as part of your imaging protocol. Because even when things are going well, you don't want to forget something, right? I mean, I don't know if any of you, I'm sure many of you have flown commercially. You know, any of you have that fear, like you're kind of coming into the airport, you go, did they remember to put the gear down? Well, there's a checklist for that because you really don't want to forget to put the gear down. So we have checklists for ways to handle the normal as well as the unusual items. And so the exciting part about this is we really see the parallel between learning to fly and flying an airplane and getting the imaging part of your clinical trial off the ground. And once you're flying with the imaging part of your clinical trial, you want to make sure you have checklists and you've thought about all the things that can go wrong. So what are we going to accomplish today? We're going to go through a whole bunch of learning objectives. Now, the main thing you can do at this point is you can try to read all of these. And there's a lot here, and I'm not going to read them to you. And I don't want to spend too much time reading them because the point is this is a lot of stuff and we're going to get through all of this. But the thing we want you to really take away from the webinar today, and the one thing we'd really, really like you to learn is to say, hey, I sat down with the ImageIQ folks and they've really showed me how to create an outstanding imaging protocol for my research and my trial. That's really the learning objective here, right? So that kind of nets it all out. And that's going to save you money. It's going to get you the data that you need. It's going to get you through your regulatory challenges with as minimal of a stress as possible, and it'll help you have a most predictable trial. And more importantly, it will help you make sure that if there is an emergency, you'll know what to do so you get the plane on the ground safely. Right? So that's really our learning objectives today. So to start out, we thought we would take a minute here at the beginning to just kind of define what an imaging protocol is, because that's an interesting question in and of itself. And we've seen, as we've worked with our clients to build imaging protocols or review their protocols or whatever, we've seen all sorts of different interpretations of the word imaging protocol. So we're going to do this a little bit top 10-like and kind of give you the rundown of what an imaging protocol is, in our opinion. Well, the first question would be, well, is it a set of instructions? Does it guide people on how to do the protocol, do the imaging in your study? Well, it is, that's true, but I think there's more, right? Is it a checklist? So we spent time talking about the piloting thing. Is it a checklist? Well, it's not quite a checklist. There may be checklists involved, but it's not a checklist, and we've seen some things that look like that in our time. For those of you who are involved in clinical trials, there are a ton of forms, right? You fill out a form for this, fill out a form for this, fill out a form so that you can fill out a form. Sometimes you have those kinds of forms. And there will be forms in your imaging protocol, but there's more to it than even that. Is it an IT workflow or architecture? We have a slide coming up here we call the plumbing slide, how you're moving things around, how does your IT and workflow architecture fit together? Strangely enough, we don't see that a lot in imaging protocols, and it's vitally important. So that is important to a part of your imaging protocol, but it's not only that. Is it, and this is what a lot of folks who are especially in the more technical realm will think about, is it the scanner settings? Is it the knobs and dials and the pitch on the CT or the echo time on the MR or whatever it might be? Is it the scanner settings? Well, strangely enough, yes, you definitely need those. But an imaging protocol is more than just the scanner settings. So you're going to find, if that's all you have, you're going to find yourself in trouble. And we've seen some protocols like that. Is it radiologist training or technologist training? Well, yes, it is. Certainly that's important. That's very, very important. So there's a training component to your imaging protocol that we'll talk about. Is it software validation? Now, sometimes when we get engaged in these clinical trials and we're helping our clients out, we say, hey, look, by the way, our software is validated. We need to go through this validation process. And they're like, what? Really? I need my software validated? Well, yes, you do. And Nick's going to spend some time in this webinar talking a little bit about what software validation is all about and how that fits into your clinical trial, not only for the Part 11 compliance, but for the good science part of it as well, right? And then finally, is it a change management plan? Well, strangely enough, we definitely need one of those because at the end of the day, things will definitely change.
Right. So, Tim, it's all of those things, but it's a whole lot more. So let's start with the definitions. If we look at what an imaging protocol is, we start with a set of written documents. We want to detail out the steps to allow our exams to be acquired. That's some of the scanner setting and those things. Interpreted analyzed, and then stored in support of what the overall study is about. So as we're talking about this set of written documents, we bring out the legal pad and start our kind of checklist here. These are are really mimicking the learning objectives that Tim showed you a few slides back. So if you were rushing to jot a few of those down, you're going to see this legal pad many, many times throughout the rest of the presentation. But since this is really just the definition, let's jump to what the study overview is. So really here the study overview is, it's a lot like your abstract for those of you who are writing white papers or publishing. It's really going to take the overall objectives and then connect them to the imaging components of the study. You want to make sure you're talking about the size and scope. You know, we've had experience with a client who was doing just a 6-week study, and then Tim blogged not too long ago about what was it, a 25-year
study. Yeah.
25-year study. So you can imagine in the study overview, you know, if you think about it as your abstract, that's kind of important to set out that tone of how long is this? How long am I going to need this documentation? How long am I going to do that? Connecting the imaging back to the study may be on sense,
right,
but what does the imaging do for you? You know, are we trying to just make sure it hasn't moved? Is it just a placement issue? Is it a degradation issue? What exactly are we looking for with imaging? So these are things that are in your head. You know this information, but we need to remember to write it down. And so often that's what we find is just missing.
Well, it's usually in the higher level study protocol, right? The higher level clinical study protocol have that information, but the imaging team sometimes doesn't get that information, and then they're struggling a bit, right?
Sure.
Right.
We're going to talk about how the imaging protocol lives and what happens to it, and that'll help kind of connect all these dots towards the rest of the presentation. So since this is just a study overview, we don't want to belabor it too much, and so we'll jump into really the imaging objectives. And Amit, you want to start us there?
Yeah, sure. So the imaging objective is basically sort of a concise and clearly written sort of overview of what the goal of the study is, and that includes what sort of anatomy you're going to be imaging, what modality or imaging scanner you're going to be using, and the basic tenet of why you're doing the study. And you might think, well, my radiologist, and just to back up a little bit, this has to be very clearly plain English written, so that everybody's on the same page, because you don't want it to have a bunch of technical terms that the radiologist technician might not understand. And you might feel like you're talking down to somebody and making it so plain, but it's really important that everybody knows what they're doing here, and they can ask questions if they're really interested.
Yeah, that clarity. You're really writing it for everyone from the PACS administrator to the radiologist.
Right.
And there's a big difference in background and education and experience.
Right. And you may think that, well, my radiologist technician doesn't even need to know why we're doing the study. But it's really important that they sort of understand that there's a reason that this could be valuable to patient care. Just as an example, let's say they're going through their patient workload, which could be a lot of patients in a given day, and they just want to get through the day. And now you've added this extra imaging time point that they have to do for this study, and they're like, well,
with a special form,
right,
into their dictation system.
Yeah, and you know what they're going to do, and be like, oh God, I have to do this again. But if you describe it to them and they're engaged, that they might be more willing to say, let's say a patient came in and you ask them to achieve a specific position and can't do it. They might just say, screw it, I'm just going to image the patient. But you really want them to call your favorite project manager at ImageIQ or somewhere else and say, look, I can't do this with this patient. Tell me what I should do. Because that's a valuable time point for you. That's something that you're paying money for as a sponsor. So you want to make sure that's clearly.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more of that in technologists and how important that buy-in
right.
Really is
right.
to get the technologist super engaged.
Right. So let's get into the meat of the protocol. So one of the most important things is obviously what equipment you're going to use to actually acquire images. And depending on your protocol, it might call for an MRI, it might call for a CT or an ultrasound, or plain just X-rays. But you need to clearly outline which scanners are going to be approved or qualified for the study. And as a imaging CRO, we go through the process of actually doing that qualification, making sure that they produce the images of sufficient quality to produce the metrics that are needed for your endpoints. Also, what's important is what sort of minimum software requirements there are for your scanner, because there are a variety of vendors, there are a variety of software versions. You have to make sure that the one that they're using is going to be appropriate for the study that you're conducting. Also, there are a number of add-on packages that each of the vendors supply. So I'll go ahead and example on one of those. But those are going to cost money, and the vendors or the sponsors are going to have to absorb that. And also any sort of auxiliary equipment that you might need, so specialized coils for MR, whether you're going to use contrast, any sort of markers for laterality or for magnification. Those are also important, and you have to sort of understand that you'll need those up front.
Right, because if you're missing those, like, I mean, just as something as simple as a magnification marker for an X-ray, right? If you're missing that, and you get this X-ray in, and somebody doesn't look at it for 48 hours, and the image, and you go, I don't know what the magnification is. For people running trials or other people doing this, you've just lost the patient. You've lost the time point. You've got a problem, right? And that's expensive, and the IRB gets a little grumpy because you've potentially dosed a patient when you shouldn't have, or you've dosed a patient and you haven't gotten any data for it, right? You haven't achieved the benefit that they decided the risk was worth it. It's an important component, right?
And really, to tie it back to our imaging protocol, it's all about writing those things down. These are decisions that you make, and it's really helpful to have them in this one central document that then can go different places and serve as kind of testimony to, we thought about this beforehand, we made calculated decisions, and this is therefore the results of those.
And just as an example for a current study that we're doing that actually touches on all of these is that it's an MRI study that's looking at, or a cartilage study that's looking at damage. It's a replacement for damaged cartilage. It's an autologous implant, and they're putting it into the knees of patients after a sports-related injury. So we had gone through the process of actually approving devices or scanner vendors that will be useful for this study, because we required a specific T2 mapping sequence to assess damage or healing of the implant. And so we determined up front that the Siemens, the GE scanner, and Philips would be good MRI systems that you could use. We ruled out Toshiba because of scanning quality and scanning time. But within those three approved vendors, the GE scanner required a specific plugin. It was called Cartogram, and that's an expensive plugin, and the sponsor would have to pay for it. So if you had multiple scanners, you have to make that decision whether you would go with a GE. On the other hand, the Philips, which has an order of magnitude number of parameters, knobs, and buttons that you could push, takes actually an hour to scan that T2 sequence. So I haven't been into many MRIs, but I know that they make that banging sound, and I don't want to sit in there for an hour while it's doing that. So, and the other problem is that within the hour, the patient's going to move, and you're going to have a really bad scan. So after that whole hour of imaging, you've got a really crappy scan that you can't analyze. So that's, if you had a Siemens, a GE, and a Philips on site, you would recommend the one that doesn't take too long or require an additional plugin.
Not that you're bashing my old Philips boys.
No,
point that out.
Right.
Well,
but sometimes the facts are the facts.
Right, and Philips are great for cardiac imaging, but not so much for musculoskeletal. So.
Yeah. And so I'll take that segue, if you don't mind, Amit, and start talking about some technologist information, right? Because let's say you do have those three scanners at your facility, at this site that you've got. It's really going to be important for the technologist to be fully engaged and understand the pros and cons and what we're trying to do and what post-processing or image interpretation or what's going to happen to those images later, so that they make sure they get those really good acquisitions for you, right? And I know Amit's going to talk about acquisition protocols here later in our time here. So specific to technologists, certainly we want to document required experience. And these are great things to calculate and make the decisions beforehand. Because it's so easy when you're on the ground, and especially if you're a sponsor dealing with multiple sites, and so the administrators at different sites are trying to adhere to your wishes. If it's not documented, there may be this bigger gray area. We recommend 2 years on the modality for a technologist to participate. Now, the question is 2 years on the modality enough? And not necessarily. It really just depends. It depends on the anatomy and how often. The best example I can think of this from my imaging background is breast MR. So, breast MR has been around for a really long time, but has only hit mainstream in pretty recent years. as it was getting to mainstream, different sites were kind of phasing it in different time points. You know, you had to buy special coils, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I know in the centers that I've dealt with, we had some centers that could do breast MR and some that couldn't. Then within the sites that could, we had some techs that we had specially trained to focus with breast MR, with the patients, with their specific needs, to work with them and position them just right so they could tolerate the exam. I don't know if those coils have gotten any better, but on the rib cage, they were real pressure, right? So you had to really work with the patient to get them in there correctly. So that's an example of an anatomy decision based on your technologist. So your 10-year seasoned MR technologist who's awesome at everything may have only done 10 MRs in their life.
Some breast MRs.
Breast MRs in their life, yes, thank you. So it may not be, you know, you may need to kind of subspecialize there. If we talk about training, we really want to talk about, and really this hits training and communication, we want to talk about really an engagement plan with your technologist, and that's really how I would think about both of these. We want to answer the questions on why we're doing this for the patient, to communicate that well to the technologist so we get that buy-in and get that adherence to the protocols and flexibility with the patients and things that we really need to make sure the images that we get at each time point are great quality images. In your documentation, you'll want to specifically mention things on training, like not only the content of the training, but the frequency. If this is your 25-year trial, maybe you want to do annual training refreshes.
Right.
If it's your 6 weeks, you know, probably not.
Well, even in a 25-year trial, right, you're going to have employee turnover, people moving, scanner upgrades, we'll talk about that later, but you need to have a plan documented on how frequent people need to be trained. Otherwise, you're going to find that 2 years goes by, and all of a sudden the quality of what you're getting is going to hell in a handbasket, right? And
Sure.
Why is that, right?
And certainly the studies that have time points further away from each other, we need to make sure that that training is, you know, kind of just in time. It hits the right sweet spots to make sure that those time points are imaged as well as they can by your technologist.
Right.
Communications are really important, obviously. Certainly a helpline, you know, Amit mentioned earlier, you know, having them call your favorite project manager here or maybe within your sponsor site or even at their location, whatever is appropriate to your trial. Whenever they have that patient that just can't tolerate the positioning, maybe it's post-surgery and they just can't, they would at future time points, but not today. And then your check-in, and this is for your site administrators. This can easily fall into their rounding that they're probably already doing, but to specify what needs to be done and by whom. You know, is it your project managers giving the sites a call? Is it your sponsor going out? You know, who's checking in and who's manning that helpline, and what does the technologist do? What to expect there? So from technologists, we move to radiologists, which is a lot of the same, just kind of adjusted for the level of experience. On radiologists, when we start talking about experience, it's a little different, but not significantly. Certainly, we want to make sure that the radiologist is trained and, you know, competent in the area, both the modality and the anatomy that you're working on, but you may require that they've been fellowship trained or something specific here, right? Definitely want to make sure you're lining those out in your imaging protocol. And then as a side point, for those of you involved in the quality stuff, you want to make sure that you've actually got their CV documentation so that you can say, this radiologist meets what I've written in my imaging protocol, and I can align those there, right? Another thing that is really good to work with your radiologist about is expected turnaround time. And again, documenting it down so it's in black and white that everybody knows and can reference back to it if anybody has to play the bad cop at some point during the trial. But a lot of radiologists are still completely embedded in clinical care. And so not only is it, you know, are you going to have time to read this additional sequence on this many patients at these time points, right? Is that going to work with your clinical care? But also just to make sure that you're getting the results that you need. Most radiologists would say, sure, you know, I can do that. But unless you tell them, but oh, I need this first time point back within 24 hours, that may change the scale. And so documenting those things are really important. training, communication plan, all the things we said for the technologist with a couple more. On the training, one of the things that you might consider training about, and we certainly recommend this when we work with our clients, and this is kind of lessons learned in projects that we've worked on here, is training specific to the CRF. Just like for the technologist, where you may want to point out things that are different from their clinical care, the radiologist needs to do the same. They need to understand that we only need you to do these measurements. We only need you to do this. You're not doing clinical interpretation for the sequence. Or maybe they are. Whatever your thresholds are need to be declared and documented here. And then we suggest test is a little overstated, right? And certainly you don't want to tell your radiologist that you're going to test them. That may freak them out a little too much. But to scan a phantom or healthy patients, some known values, and have them complete the CRF to make sure that what you told them was digested, they uptook the information correctly, they digested the information, and they're able to then reproduce predictable results, right? You've got these measurements, you know it, so the way that they measure it, is it the same? Amit's probably going to make some comments later on terms used to make sure that radiologists pull out an old textbook if you want a specific measurement that maybe isn't done so much in clinical care, and they brush up on those things. Again, communication, the helpline, rounding plan, and above all, document, document, document. You know, that's really what the imaging protocol is all about. So now, I think we've gotten through the people parts of it. So let's talk about the software validation. Amit?
So when you think about software, you might say, well, my radiologist is making the measurements. I don't really need to validate software. There's no software. But they're using software to make the measurements. I mean,
yeah, I haven't seen a radiologist pull out film and a ruler in several years.
Right. And to that point, you know, they're using calipers and you know, measurement tools on their, you know, their choice, their vendor's PAC system or whatever software they're using, and they're just drawing a line on an image. It's a caliper, but that has to be translated. There has to be a pixel spacing that's in the header somewhere on the image that gets sent to the caliper that tells it exactly what size the caliper is. You need to make sure that you validated that you know what that measurement is. And you know, other things that are associated with software or control software is, you know, what version it is. So let's say it's software that is on their PAC system, or it's software that even ImageIQ developed for you that's customized. It has to be appropriately versioned, locked down, so when it's deployed, you know exactly what version it is. If there's any issues that need to be corrected, it has a new version number, so people know what they want to correct.
Right. My IT background, you know, IT departments are known, and PACS vendors that are sometimes known for pushing hot fixes in the middle of the night. And if you don't realize that, and if there was a problem, and if it wasn't validated, and if, and you start to get problems.
Right. And associated with that is the operating system. I mean, people know that when you upgrade your operating system, something's going to break. So you have to make sure that you have that.
All right, that was so I upgraded to iOS 7 last night. It didn't go so well for me. That's fair. All right.
Which was all self-inflicted,
yeah.
You know, from the Apple fan in the room here.
Yeah.
The other part of it is, you know, how are you going to prove that you've done the validation, right? So, or how are you going to go about even doing it? So, you know, one of the things that you can do is, we term it as confirmation of intended use. You can create a phantom image, or set aside a set of test images where the radiologist, in conjunction with his software or your customized software, if it's image that you developed or some other vendor, that has gone through that phantom image and made the appropriate measurements correctly within a tolerance, right? And then you need to show evidence that that's happened, right? You have to have it as a report. And then finally, you know, how are you going to make sure that you've actually appropriately reviewed it and said, yes, it passed. You have an expert review it, whether it's a radiologist or another piece of third-party software that's gone through the process. So.
Right. So in your imaging protocol, you're really going to line out, can they use any PAC system, or is it a specific one? Does it have to be on a certain rev? Does it not? Or they can use anything, just provide X, Y, and Z. And so those are really the things that are going to show up in your document. You're going to do all the things that talked about, but if you're trying to tie this back to what subheaders need to be in my document, right, these are things that you want to think about.
Right. Well, and to connect a couple other dots, you know, a lot of this stuff is interrelated, right?
Oh,
but,
gotcha.
you know, you were talking about making sure you have the right software package before. So, you know, if you mentioned that it's a cartogram package, right? So if you're using a version of that package and the vendor comes out with, and that may be on a scanner, it may not even be part of your PAC system. You got to kind of keep these scanners all have software.
Oh, right. The FSE comes out and does updates and just does your routine maintenance and throws that update on the system. That's great. But
and the worst thing that you can do is assume that the vendor that you're using has validated the software, because you might think, well, it's Siemens, they've gone through and they validated it. It has to be right. You know, you'd be surprised, you know, on certain things that they haven't gone through and said, okay, I've actually validated it. So, you know, go through your own process.
It's not that hard. That's right.
So we'll go from that to image acquisition. And Amit and I both have some sections here as we start to kind of dive in. Interestingly, this is what we see most of all when someone asks us to review their imaging protocol. They've really focused kind of on this next section. And while that is super important, and somewhat the easy part, it's what we all automatically go to, it's not the whole story, as you're seeing. So when we talk about the scanner settings, certainly you want to focus on, you know, what modality is it? Is it, you know, does it need the 3T MR, or can, you know, your 0.3 open work just fine? You know, there's probably a choice there that you want to make. Those are completely different, but technically both MRs, right? So you want to look at those things. And again, this really goes back to your technologist. They want to get these things done, and so they need to know that, okay, I can go between the 3T and the 1.5 magnet we have, but I need to stay away from the opens. Or I really need to focus on this, and so what happens if there's an outage? You know,
or something as simple as CR versus plain film X-ray versus DR.
Oh, exactly. Right? There's a whole lot of...
Because in their mind, a lot of those things clinically are interchangeable, but for your trial, they may not be, and you need to make sure that all the settings for all the possible scanners are outlined.
Right, definitely, definitely. So the next thing that, as we talk about scanner settings, we want to think about is certainly the protocol storage in the name. We want to save the protocol on the scanner to the extent that it's possible. Now, when we get to ultrasound, we can certainly store a lot of things, but it's very tech dependent. Even with X-ray, it's pretty tech dependent. You know, positioning exactly right, and the personality of the tech really comes through if they can make get the patient to really do what they need them to do. CT and MR are really straightforward, loaded on the scanner, and you know, kind of autopilot to a little extent. The last thing is critical items that can create a problem, and a couple of things here that really stand out to us. We're really spoiled by technology. Like Tim thought the iOS 7 update would go fabulously well.
I should have told you guys.
And didn't do the backup beforehand, right? But we're really spoiled by this. And so your technologist today may be used to putting laterality on X-rays with a simple click of the mouse. And it drops their initials in there and the laterality. If you're anonymizing these images for your study and stripping a lot of the patient, you know, the PHI off of them, it may strip that digital overlay off as well, and then you've got images with no laterality markers.
Right, or it may not. But
or it may not.
You need to know.
You need to know, and you need to declare it, right? Whether software markers or they need to go old school and get their lead back out. Either is fine, but to test, to document that, you know, lead markers are required because in some cases we have seen XYZ really hits it home with the technologist and in this protocol to let them know, okay, I need to do this and this is why, and that really helps adherence to the protocol. So the next one is really my plug for checklist that Tim mentioned earlier. We all see technologists that are doing great work in clinical care and have patient throughput that make us all really proud whenever it comes to, you know, filling our rooms and really leveraging our assets. But sometimes that gets us into a little bit of trouble. And with a trial, we don't have time to get into trouble. So, you know, you may miss a time pointer, things like that. So just a little checklist, and checklists certainly don't have to be like our yellow legal pad, you know, a whole page of documentation. It can easily be 2 or 3 things. You know, check the patient motion, make sure the anatomy was completely visualized. Did it save to PACS? I know you pushed the button.
Right, yeah.
Did it get there?
Right.
And did it get there without problems? Did it get there as you intended it to? You know, those are things that are really, really important. And as a little kind of sidebar, if you haven't had the opportunity to read the checklist manifesto by Atul Gawande, It's a really quick read. It's a good read. It kind of ties in Tim's flying examples back to us here in healthcare and kind of draws that correlation. It's a pretty good read, and it really talks about checklists being super short and really just the things that you've got to know. So
they're useful.
Yeah, they're pretty useful. So another element here is patient positioning, and Amit's going to take this a little further on the next slide with his acquisition protocol. But one of the things here is to really remember that a picture's worth 1,000 words. It really is. So it takes a lot of words to describe exactly how you want that patient positioned, where a picture is just going to show it and give the technologist a real reference point. So to the extent that you can drop those in. The other thing that we've kind of mentioned already is that your team is used to the clinical standard of care. So where your x-ray is a great example, right? You may want a hip x-ray positioned a little abnormally to make sure that the implant is completely visualized. And you can see all the soft tissue. So you may want it tweaked a little differently than clinical care. Well, the technologist is used to doing a hip. They've done it their entire career, right? I mean, that's no big deal. So really document the differences there and the changes to the standards that they use. Maybe it's that one MR sequence that you guys mentioned. Hopefully it's not the whole hour. Amit, why don't you talk a little bit more about acquisition and show us some examples?
Sure. So just like we mentioned, several times, just make sure that your acquisition protocol or your image acquisition protocol, IAP, sometimes they're called, is very concise. It could be one page, it could be a couple of pages, but don't let it be like 10 or 15 pages long because if you imagine this being in the clinical setting where a technologist has this protocol, they're not going to see these patients on a regular basis. They'll see them maybe 6 months apart. So they're not going to remember that you had this acquisition, a specific acquisition protocol.
In Appendix B in this big document. And that's why we said at the beginning the definition of an imaging protocol really is a set of documents. This is one of those, a lot of this you could see as sections in a document. This is one of those things. It's probably good to be a separate document that can be put somewhere and
pulled out, laminated, put in a binder at the modality. Yeah.
And it's they can pull it out and quickly do a refresher because they know that this patient came in and this is part of this study. So. And what it's going to do is give them which acquisition techniques they're going to use, and I'll show you some examples in the next couple slides. What modality settings they're going to put in there, and this is sort of backwards, but what they really should do is assess the protocol. Have them look at the protocol before the trial even starts, because they're going to need to be able to say whether, because they're the experts on their particular machine. They've been scanning on this GE scanner for past 10 years. They know what it can do. And so if you give them this protocol, they can tell you really quickly that, oh, well, I can't get that field of view, or yes, there's going to be an issue me positioning this patient this way for the scanner. So, let them see it and let them become comfortable with it. And again, it's part of the engagement process, right? They know they're involved and they made a decision, right?
Well, and I know what we've done for many of our clients is we've go through this assessment process. Ultimately, it makes your image acquisition protocol better and more reliable. So taking a little, it's kind of the, just take the time up front. An ounce of prevention. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Right. Take the time up front to go through an assessment of the acquisition protocol. Will save you a ton of headaches later on in the movie.
Right. And the last thing is, again, list the help information. Who to call if they have questions. Your project manager at ImageIQ or wherever your CRO is.
Right.
Have them available and answer those questions for you.
Yeah, you've got a couple of great examples.
So this is one of the more exotic sort of protocols. This is an ultrasound. So it's very, like Shannon mentioned, it's tech heavy, or technician heavy, experience heavy, right? Because they're actually moving a probe around versus a patient sitting in a scanner where the scanner bed is moving the patient. So this clearly outlines the equipment that's required. So it's like a Philips scanner in this case, what frequency of the probes that they're going to use, and then if there's any presets, what preset to load in. And then it shows you what position of the patient should be, what the probe position should be, and it gives you a representative image. So in the image that you're looking at, you see a probe as the position it should be on the patient, and then an example image that should show up on your screen. So, and then on the bottom it shows you some of the measurements that are going to be outputted from there.
So you can easily imagine laminating this, sticking it on the bookshelf, and ultrasound, so when these patients come in, they just pull it out and almost use it as a checklist, but then that reference point to look back at is the probe at the exact right angle, and am I really visualizing what I need to?
Right, exactly. And this is another protocol from the CT. There's looking at it's a patient-specific planning software that's going to use the scans that are coming out of the CT. And again, it clearly outlines this is actually only a 3-page protocol. This is the first page. It shows you what the key goals are of the study, what the positioning of the patient is, and then it clearly, in the table below, clearly outlines what the specific regions of interest that need to be in the image, and then, diameters for the field of view, column region thickness, box thickness, all of those relevant information metrics that you need to feed into the scanner. And then what's really important is on the far right is tube current. So on a CT, you can have various dosage protocols that are implemented by the vendor, and they're called automatic exposure control and dose control management systems. You need to know which ones are going to give you the best quality images, because in some cases you can't turn that off. Maybe the site won't let you turn it off because it's part of their patient care. So, you have to make sure that you've accounted for that. And we actually go through a process of actually validating that ourselves with a Phantom, but, you might have to use other means to actually do that validation.
All right, so the next plan, so we've kind of gone through the image acquisition protocol part of this, and we're coming down the home stretch, and we've got a little bit of time here, so we got a few more things to cover for you. Hopefully you can all stick with us through to the top of the hour, and we'll definitely be done by then.
Okay.
We want to talk a little bit about your image management plan. I like to call this the plumbing. How are you going to move images around? How are you going to get images from place to place, and what's going to happen? This is probably one of the biggest things we see missing in an imaging protocol, and it creates some of the most incredible headaches. We get
it's getting more and more complex too.
Right.
More hospitals are doing system-wide,
right.
EHRs and things like that. We're seeing more and more layers too of the process.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, just starting here in our little upper right with our technologists. Well, how do the technologists get in the order? I mean, to your point, Shando, we've got folks putting stuff in EHRs and the old HIS systems and order entry and all that. Are your patients for your trial going into that system, or are they not? You need to ask that question. And then once the image is acquired, how modalities have modality work lists, and they're getting these things fed into them now all electronically, so people aren't retyping things. Well, if it's not in the modality work list, do they know that they need to type it in? Do they understand the subject numbering scheme, the study numbering scheme? I mean, there's all sorts of things. And then you can continue to talk about this, and I won't belabor the point, but you've got to get your image, as Shanda pointed out earlier, from your scanner into your PACS system. Is it going to go into the mainstream PACS? Are you setting up a separate PACS? How are you going to get it from the site to the central reading area if you're doing central reading? Maybe you've got a radiologist. Maybe you've got an adjudication step and you need a double read, a second radiologist. Maybe there's some software involved that's going to be doing QA. How do you get the images there? How do you make sure two technologists at two different sites are doing the same thing so that you're getting a consistent set of data? That's the challenge with plumbing. And taking the time to make a diagram like this that describes the protocols. And, one of the arrows might say DICOM on them, but one of the arrows might say FedEx, and that's okay, right? That may be how it is. And we run into that a lot. You have hospitals that have IT policies that they're just not comfortable sending this stuff over secured, virtual private network, secure DICOM over the intranet, if you will. And that's okay. So you just got to make sure CDs get labeled the right way, burned the right way, and shipped to the right place.
Right. How many times have we seen that the site would go to the real trouble of anonymizing the patient images,
right,
and then burn them to a CD and write the patient name on it?
Right. Right.
That's what they always do. They write the patient name on the CD.
Right. So just an important part of something that can go in your protocol. Now we'll keep going here because we've got just a few more things to cover. So we covered image management plan, and what Amit's going to cover real quick here is kind of where the rubber hits the road, that image evaluation protocol where your radiologist or your software, I guess, does some analysis for you, right?
Right. Just like you have the image acquisition protocol, which is for the technologist, you have an image evaluation protocol for a radiologist. And really all that is how they're going to read the image or the scan and then translate it into values that are asked for, requested in the CRF. So you've given them the CRF. It has all the measurements, and these are what you're asking them to report on. What you really want to do is, make sure that you've highlighted all of the non-standard measurements. And I'm not saying non-standard because there's stuff that is not out there. It's some of these radiologists that you're going to be working with have been out of school for like 10, 20 years, and they may not be up to speed on some of the...
So kind of non-routine measurements, right?
Term. So, for example, going back to our cartilage trial that we're running, we're asking them to give us an ICRS grade, which is a grade for how badly damaged the cartilage or how well it's healing. And I've had radiologists that tell me, well, I don't know what that is because when I score or when I read a scan, I don't put that in a report. So it's not a hard process or a hard sort of scoring system to understand, but you have to give them the relevant, papers and sort of train them, and they're willing to understand that they need to do that. The other part of it is, make sure that they've read the CRF ahead of time, just like the technology says to assess your protocol. Make sure they've assessed the CRF, because they're going to be able to look at the quality of an image and say, yeah, based on the images that you've given me, and this is before a trial starts, based on the images that you've given me, I can make this measurement or I can't make this measurement. And so that will gear how you actually modify the image acquisition protocol.
Right.
So
Sure.
it's all a working sort of system. So the other part of this is the adverse event management system. You need to have that in place, because in a lot of cases, the centralized reader is the only person that's ever going to see these scans. The site themselves aren't going to read these. So if they see something abnormal in the scan, they need to know who to notify so that patient problem gets addressed and quickly, right? Also, just as part of the reading workflow, what are they supposed to do once they've done the assessment? Do they pass it on to another reader? Do they use software to do an additional analysis? And then finally, how are you going to adjudicate if there's multiple readers? Who makes the decision on whether it passes or fails, or this particular score should be a 3 or a 4? So
Sure.
Make sure that that's clear. Once you have an image acquisition protocol in place and you have your evaluation protocol in place, you're now going to start getting these images as the trial progresses. It doesn't end there. You still need to do a quality check control and monitor the site to make sure that they're acquiring images, that the radiologist is reading them correctly. Because these trials, like you said, could be 25 years long. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to make sure
Blows
it's
your
an
mind.
ongoing process. Right, exactly. So part of this is, identifying the right people to do the quality check, and maybe it's a couple of people that you're in-house that do it, or maybe it's another radiologist. Determine what method you're going to use. Are you going to send it to a third-party software that's going to look at signal to noise or contrast ranges and things like that, or are you going to have a person just do a manual inspection and say, oh yeah, this image passes my QC. I can see the implant, or I can see the appropriate field of view. And then, make sure that you have a way to actually document or identify the requirements and put them somewhere. So, I'm sure everybody on the call has a quality system in-house. And as an engineer, it's the bane of my existence to actually have to go in.
There's a big eye roll in the room.
Right.
Look, focus at me here.
That I have to go in and check off on a list that I've done this measurement. But it's important, like Chandra says, you have to do your homework, right? Otherwise, no one knows that you did it. You can't chase things if something goes wrong. So, and then determine what the rate is going to be for your quality check. How are you going to do it at the start of a trial? Are you going to do it periodically? Are you only going to do it after an adverse event? Right.
And really, as you're documenting all these things, the who is really important, right? Is it a technologist doing some QC before it goes? Is it a radiologist? Is it software? Is it, who's doing it? So as you kind of go down the list in your imaging protocol, you'll really want to answer the who, how often, when, things like that.
Exactly. And we did a webinar with the IMARC guys, Sandra Maddock and I did a webinar on risk-based monitoring for imaging trials, which we have recorded. If you guys want to watch it, it's recorded in our little Imaging Analytics University website. But one of the things we talked about a lot was how you can adjust your monitoring rate based on the behavior of a site. So at startup, you need to do this. If the site can run X successful reads or acquisitions, whatever X is, 10, 5, 20, whatever, then, you can turn down your monitoring rate. Just like here, we could have called that risk-based QC. You could turn down your acquisition. If they have some kind of an adverse event, they ship you a bad image, they really blow the protocol or something, then you have a plan to turn up the QC rate. And that risk-based approach to quality control, if you document it and put it in your imaging protocol, it'll be easy to follow, everyone will know how it's going to go, and then you'll stay in compliance. And the folks doing your monitoring, we love IMARC, but the folks doing your monitoring are going to love you because now they know how to do the monitoring for the imaging.
Oh, right. And at the end, no one's going to look back and say, wait a minute, why does this site's information look different? Why did you spend more time here than there? Should we trust images more or less? So
right.
I think as we wrap up imaging protocol, it looks like our yellow legal pad is almost complete, which is good because we're coming up on the top of the hour. It's gone fast from our room here. Let's talk about one last thing, and that's change management. You gotta love O'Murphy, right?
Yeah.
Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will, and this is really the point that we need to consider that. So as we're considering it, we're documenting things, and these are all maybe what keeps you up at night or your worst nightmares about things. And the change management plan will document the easy things that you expect that will happen. If it's 25 years versus 6 weeks, it's going to be a short list or a very, very long one. But even the things that you don't know, we don't know what we don't know, how are you going to assess it? And so let's talk about a few of the common ones. New radiologists and new technologists. That's on any trial of any considerable time, that's certainly going to happen. And so your change management plan may just simply say that when this happens, we're going to repeat the initial training, we're going to monitor the first 10 images that they do, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and so you'll document that in your change management plan. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, we're feeling pretty good here. Murphy doesn't have anything on us. Well, what happens about the next one? Now we've got software modifications. Somebody flips a hot fix on you, or it is a long trial, and gosh, what if you do a scanner upgrade? What if that's a forklift upgrade? What if it's material? Now you need to think about when would you bring in a physicist? When would you redo just a phantom scan? When would you, do all of these different different metrics to really quantify what has changed and that it's still within tolerances, right?
And I know we've mentioned the 25-year trial a bunch of times, but man, over 25 years, you're getting new scanners.
I sure hope so.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Right, and there may be new, that's a great point, because there may be new, totally new scanners, right?
Right.
Maybe it's a new modality within the 25-year period. Do you embrace that, or do you stick to what you've got?
That's a very good point. If you know a trial is going to be that long, it might be a good idea to have a phantom-based system to do your quality, your QC, because then not only does it give you an idea of what's changed within a site, but now you can compare across sites, across all the years, and across vendors.
And certainly 25 years is an extreme, but we see trials for our clients that we're managing their 5, 6, 7, 10. So it's not unusual.
Sure, and if you're across multiple sites, every site has an equipment refresh plan, right? And so some of those, maybe it's a 5-year mark. Some of them may not, but it's good to know when to put in your change management plan here what's important and what's a big deal and what needs to be taken upon review. The last couple here are protocol changes and quality problems. And so these are a little different, right? Because you can't lay your hands on them.
Right.
They're just something that you may want to consider. Let's say your sites are having a lot of problem getting great images with the protocol that's written, and you need to really go back to the basics to say, okay, maybe our positioning is wrong. What if you have protocol changes, if you have quality problems, what type of group do you want to assemble to make those decisions? Right. Is it just you?
Right, so you're not going to document what changes you're going to have because you won't know.
You won't know.
But you need to know who to call
and
where to go.
And so whether you set up a scale that says if it's a minor problem, we only need this person to decide and this person to approve. If it's a major change, we want to get all of our subject matter experts back together. If it's really big, maybe it has to go back to the IRB, But what elements need to be in that? A really good example that comes to mind is several years ago, whenever I was back in clinical care, I remember we had a big radiopharmaceutical issue. Every week we'd get messages that came out about if we were going to be able to get technetium or not. So if you've got a nuclear-based trial and you're drug dependent, and what happens if you can't get that drug? What happens? Certainly we would have never thought about that proactively, but if it came up and it's at one of your time points, it could be critical. So your change management plan here is really, remember, we're not solving everything. We're just documenting the decision points, right, and who needs to be involved. We've talked throughout this about a lot of different people involved. We talked about having your tech check out the acquisition protocol, your radiologist, maybe the CRFs. These are really your subject matter experts. IT needs to be involved, some quality people, and so your change management plan should identify those people either by name or by role, right, and the contact information on how to do this. At 25, if it's a 25-year study, then maybe some of those folks aren't around, so you really want to gauge some of those. So hopefully you've got your steps in front of you so that if Murphy shows up, you've got a plan.
Absolutely.
And I think that's about it.
Well, there's your list and the summary of all the things that make a good we think, a good imaging protocol for your trials. And, like we said, that's going to be several documents. It's going to manifest itself in several ways, and it'll be different sizes and shapes and colors depending on all the excitement that you have going on in your trials. So what we'll do here, we've got just a few minutes before the top of the hour, and boy, that really took a little bit of time. So we'll do a couple of questions here. And
I'm not really get excited about this stuff, right?
Yeah, that's good. No,
it's
awesome. It's awesome. So let's start with a few things here, and we'll go with a couple of questions, just probably two, right? So one question, this is kind of an interesting one, is how many pages is an imaging protocol document? I guess I always talk about how thick a document is, like will it kill a bug, right? I mean, what kind of thing would it kill if you dropped it on? How thick do you think an image? How big is an imaging protocol? How big can it be?
I would say it depends. It depends on how long your study is. It depends on how many modalities. It depends on what role imaging is playing. Amit?
Well, and the important thing here is that it's not necessarily one document, so I wouldn't even think about it in terms of number of pages per document, because really you're going to shunt different ones, different parts of these to different people. Like the IAP, the acquisition protocol, only needs to go to the technologist. That's a page, or it's a couple pages. Image evaluation protocol is another one that goes to just the radiologist, so that's another page. So it can be broken apart, so I wouldn't be worried so much about the length of it. It has to be short, obviously, but it's going to be a multifaceted document.
Totally agree. Yeah, you're going to end up ripping it apart to give this section to the text and this to the rads and different things.
Here's another good question. I like this one. By approved scanners, do you mean approved by the study committee or by the FDA or both?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question.
That's actually a really interesting question. So generally the FDA doesn't necessarily approve scanners. There are guidelines for accreditation. So,
well, certainly they're approved to market. They're managed as a Class 2 medical device or a Class 1 medical device or whatever, right?
But the FDA might come back to you and say, I need to make sure it's ACR accredited. So really all that involves is a phantom that's scanned on a weekly basis, and the images that come out of it are QC'd and made sure that they're within a tolerance. So the problem with usually a clinical trial is that because they don't want to disturb the workflow at the site, they will shunt patients to a clinical or a research scanner, which isn't accredited. So you have to go through the process of doing that accreditation yourself. So that means buying a phantom, and maybe you don't do it a weekly scan, but you do it every 6 months, and you send it out to a third party.
Right. So when we talk about the approved scanners in our imaging protocol, it's really all of those things. So you're declaring in your imaging protocol which ones are approved for the study, right? Like I think you mentioned Toshiba in that one instance just shouldn't be used because it cannot accomplish what we need to accomplish for that specific study. The FDA is fine with it. Those machines are obviously ACR accredited, but it's not right for this. And then you'll want to declare whether or not you do require ACR accreditation on those scanners as well. Yeah.
So we got one more question here. Then we got time for this one. We can make a quick answer out of this one.
Okay.
Is there a difference between the imaging protocol and the imaging review charter?
They can be. It depends a lot on your CRO and the sponsors that are involved. Sometimes they'll have a charter in place, and they refer to it as an acquisition protocol, and so the site will get it, and they'll have this review charter that either they're reviewing or they're acquiring images. Really, they're just the terms. I mean, an image acquisition protocol actually could be both, and as long as somebody agrees to what that is, you'll be in good shape.
Yeah, so agreeing with things is a good point that I think we missed in this whole thing is depending on what you're doing, you may need a definition page in your imaging protocol. What are all the acronyms, and does this imaging protocol equate to the imaging review charter? And so you can just declare that in your definitions and it should be good to go.
Absolutely. All right. Well, look, we will wrap up because we've hit the top of the hour. I want to thank all of you for sticking with us. It always amazes me of how many folks stay for the whole time. Hopefully that means we're adding some value for you. You're finding something really useful here. Shanda and Amit, thank you again. Shanda, welcome to your first ImageIQ webinar. Amit, thanks again. You've done amazing.
And if anybody was trying to take notes and couldn't do something, this will be on the website too.
Yep, we'll be recorded on the website. You can visit us at ImageIQ, give us a call, send up smoke signals, whatever you want. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we will talk to you all soon, I hope.
Yeah, take care.